I am Sarah Zylstra. I'm a writer for the Gospel Coalition and a member of New City Church, which is a Christian Reformed congregation in Kansas City, Missouri. And I am here with Derek Buikema, who is the pastor of Orland Park Christian Reformed Church.
And we're the hosts of the Banner podcast. In our first season, we're analyzing Synod 2026, and we're taking a look at the way that God uses the ordinary work of government to bless and to grow his church. Our guest today is Chad Steenwyk, who not only served as this year's president, but was also vice president in 2023 and was a delegate in 2008 and 2013. Welcome, Chad.
It seemed to me, but this is because I'm a person who doesn't watch Synod every year, that there's a lot of people who put their name in the queue to talk about a lot of different things. Was there an extra lot of talking this year or not? And then my second question is, how do you guys know when it is I've watched you both call the question, like, how do you know when it's time to do that or when it would be worth talking longer?
I don't know that there was more in the queue this year than normal.
Okay.
At least, back in 2023, we would have queues that were 50 people long.
Yeah.
And we did have some 2.5 hour discussions. We didn't have anything that lasted that long this year. But that is a bit of an art, I think.
It is.
It's sort of reading the room.
Yeah.
Am I hearing the same thing over and over again? Or am I hearing people talk about other things rather than just this, this topic? Because, you need to stay on topic, but they're ready to move on to something else. So let's just decide on this and then we can move to the next recommendation. So you're listening for that. You can see people getting fidgety.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They're out there like they're ready to be done. Or you see people going to kind of stand in the back like, okay, we've talked about this enough. I can't talk about this anymore. And you feel like, both sides had a chance to speak. And sometimes you get into a discussion, you think it's going to be a heavy discussion, and everyone that speaks is for it.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, then we don't need to go on with 30 speakers if everybody is for it or against it or whatever. So you got to move on. I'll tell you one thing that was really helpful to me is I really asked the other officers, I said, please don't be afraid to suggest to me when you feel it's time as well too. So Derek would hand me notes, and I don't know how far they got passed up the officer line, but he'd say, maybe you want to consider ceasing debate. And so you'd see us whisper a little bit. I said, I'm planning to in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Or that kind of thing, just kind of the back and forth. So it's not like I'm just trying to make that decision by myself or Derek by himself either.
Yeah.
We're just trying to test this together. And overall, I feel like I don't want to toot our own horn, but I feel like we did pretty well with that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that some of it, again, is that this is a really scattershot synod. So at Synod 2022, when the HSR deliberations came up, I gave 4 hours for that deliberation because I knew that was that everything else that happened was going to be a footnote to the human sexuality debate. So we took 4 hours to work through that, maybe even more as we added, got to the confessional status piece. And I told everybody I wasn't going to allow a calling of the question. I wasn't going to cease debate, that I wanted everybody to be heard because it felt to me that this deliberation had the potential to fracture the denomination, which it has ended up doing. People have left because of that. Mm-hmm. And it felt to me that since that was the case, I didn't feel right in any way trying to stop deliberation about it. And so we worked all the way through. I mean, we probably heard from a full quarter to 30% of Synod speak on the matter. Mm. And this year, that would have been, I think, really malpractice to allow any conversation to go that long because we had a much more scattershot range of things to do. And that really would have been entirely unhelpful. And so the fact that there were motions to cease debate a little bit more frequently, not only from you, but also from the body, just spoke to the fact that we had a broader range of things to go through. And so we all recognized we couldn't go as deep in any one of these matters as we could on the HSR, gravamen, these sorts of things that have taken up wide segments of what it is that we've talked about. So the need was there. And I think people felt it too, because every time you moved to cease debate, it was nearly unanimous in terms of people that
overwhelmingly,
were ready to do that.
Approved. We had so many significant topics this year. Nothing as I guess earth-shaking as we've had in the previous few years, but all of them were significant and they needed some discussion. But we did need to move on, and we wanted to get our work done. And so I don't think there was any motion to cease debate that we ruled out of order at all this time. Once people were saying that, it felt like the body was ready. And I think they did allow discussion. They didn't cut it off at the first or second. Maybe one time there was a motion to table. I think that was the first speaker up. And I did allow that because I thought this is going to be kind of a referendum on whether we want to talk about this now anyway. So,
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think probably another sign to you guys is how fast people take their name out of the queue after it's called.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, I guess, I'm probably not going to change anybody's mind at this point. And
it was amazing. Like once if they cease debate from the floor, the speaker queue remains. But we had speaker queues of 15, 20 that would be down to 6 or 7 almost immediately. So
yes, like the vast majority of people want us to end, and that's what
jumping out.
It's like, hey, let's end this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so my question for you is, now that Synod is done, what responsibilities do you have for the next Synod, or when does this job end?
So we have a meeting on Monday. So we'll get together as a recap with via Zoom with some of the Synod staff. I know Zach is on sabbatical, so he will probably not be a part of that meeting on Monday, I'm guessing. Okay. But then, so we'll have to kind of do some wrap up. And then throughout the year, we really don't have a lot of responsibility until we get to next spring when the program committee work starts. So really, we are the ones that put our name on the program committee for next year. And so that is going to be a task that we'll have to take ownership of. Now, the Synod office does a ton of work, but you have to have all the delegates named next year. You have to have at least a good portion of the agenda put together so you can kind of figure out what committees are going to get what reports and who's going to sit on what advisory committee. So all of that stuff will be our work. It'll be 9 months from now.
How long does that take? Do you have to go through the overtures and decide what committee they go under? Or
no, usually the Synod office will decide how many committees are we going to need and which overtures are going to go to which committees to deliberate on.
And we typically have similar committees. There's always, synodical services. There's always a finance committee. There's always a ecumenical committee. And so some of those things fall very naturally into those committee buckets. And so that makes it fairly easy. We can shuffle some things around if we look at it and say, no, I think this is going to be too heavy for this committee. And you're sort of gauging that as you go along. Probably a bigger task is figuring out who is the right reporter and chair for each of those advisory committees.
What qualifications or what do you think about when you make those decisions?
Willingness to let their name stand.
That's first.
Experience of having served in that role before or as an alternate chair or alternate reporter. You don't usually want to put somebody to chair a committee if this is their first Synod or their second Synod. Yeah. So those are they're getting fewer and fewer folks willing to be chairs or reporters, though. And we're getting more and more first-time delegates, too. I mean, this Synod was, 108 first-time delegates?
It was something like that.
108 out of 179 total delegates.
But I was talking with Ashley and Joel, and they said, we typically have a lot of first-time delegates.
Yeah, but
this was a lot more than
108.
That's over half.
Yeah, and 108 to 70 basically is what that is then. So first-time delegates ruled the day at this Synod.
Well, and being a chair or a reporter of an advisory committee is a big job because you're responsible for one thing, just trying to get this body. Because a lot of the deep and really personal conversation happens in those advisory committees. You're in a smaller group. You're able to say things. You don't have to get in the queue to talk and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of back and forth. But they've got to manage a lot of things. And I think they did a great job this year. Overall, we had such a good group. And then what's interesting is we had a few minority reports. And so when a minority report comes up, they got to pick another chair and another reporter from that committee. And in some ways, that felt like to me a bit of an interview.
Yeah.
I think that person could really do well in the future. So you kind of have that. Now, again, not everybody comes as a delegate every year, and that's a good thing. But I think there's a few folks that were like, we didn't have them on the list, but I think in the future they should be considered if they're a delegate again and they're willing to do it. Yeah,
that's really good. It seems to me like for the last couple of years, when we came out of one Synod, we knew what was going to be the issue for the next. Mm-hmm. Like, I can see this come. This was left a little bit undone, or this was what was sort of. It starts to bubble, right? Or we start to talk about it, and then the next Synod, they're like ready to make a call, right. or they've written an overture. What can you guys think about, were there a couple topics that started to bubble that you're wondering maybe this will come back to us next year?
I know one that will come back is whether or not our world belongs to God, the contemporary testimony, if that's going to remain in the covenant for office bearers. I know there was some discussion about whether or not that was a decision we could make at this synod or not. One of the things that most people don't know is that when something's in the church order, two subsequent synods need to approve it before it's ratified or before it becomes officially a part of church order.
Yeah. So we as Synod 2026 can propose, but 2027 will have to ratify before the change can take place.
And then in the supplements for the church order, those can be changed in just 1 year. So whatever is decided in the supplements of church order, that can be changed. So the covenant for office bearers sits as a supplement. So in some ways it could be changed in 1 year, but it also is referenced in a church order article. So that is something that requires 2 subsequent years. Thinking of this as something that is so significant for the denomination. I remember back, I think it was 2012, when they proposed a new covenant for office bearers. And we had the form of subscription previously. And the initial proposed covenant for office bearers really changed that document. So it became much more loose and but Synod said, no, we don't want that. So it kind of came back and forth for several years. They had some significant conversations on that. And I look back today and I think we would not be having the confessional conversations we had today if we did not tighten up that covenant for office bearers years ago. Maybe tighten up is the wrong word, but just making sure it had the weight that we needed it to have, and that we do say that we believe what we say we believe, and we're going to live into that. I think if that had been changed those 15 years ago, we would be in a very different place as a denomination. So because of that, when you're looking at the covenant for office bearers, I'm like, I don't think that's something that should be changed quickly.
It also is, I love CRC church history, and it's fascinating sort of being a part of it as it's developing, because who wrote some of the key overtures to retain the language that was necessary in our covenant for office bearers.
Who was that?
Joel Vanderwerken.
Was it really?
It was. So in 2009 and 2012, he wrote the major overtures about that. He's now our director of ecclesiastical governance. So, yeah.
He's in a good spot.
He is. It's something that he's cared about for a long time.
Yeah. So we were consulting together about that decision. So that is one thing that will come to Synod next year. Can you think of anything else that you think is going to be bubbling up next year?
Next year, one of the big questions is going to be, we made really extensive changes to the church order and supplements around worship. And that was something that was debated. And a lot of people, it was passed, these changes and adding it into the church order. But a lot of people said, I love the changes. I love all of the language, but I'm not sure this belongs in the church order. And so I think that that's going to be another thing that's going to be deliberated. And I think the denominational deliberation will be along those same lines. Is the church order the right place for all of these changes? And therefore, should they be ratified? Or is this something that belongs in a directory of worship or something like that? So I think that will be a discussion over the course of the next year.
Yeah, that seemed to be almost the disjunction in that conversation.
Right.
Even though that was passed, it was, and it wasn't over whether we should have something like this or should have just a guide for worship that's all put in one place. That was one discussion that I was really excited about, because there seemed to be a commonality across the board.
Yeah.
In some ways you can kind of predict what a person is going to say when they come to the mic. This year, especially in that conversation, it was like I wasn't able to predict some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's a sign of health in our denomination, that we can have these debates, that the lines aren't as starkly drawn one way or another. They kind of cut across different ways. And I think that's a really good sign for us. Yeah.
I wondered if now that you guys had some significant discussions about our ecumenical relationships. And I wondered if now that had been drawn to the attention of Synod, if maybe there'd be some overtures surrounding who are we in communion with? Who are we in cooperation with? What organizations do we belong to? Is probably worth, as we define ourselves, worth defining.
That will be a big topic coming up. I sit on the Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations Committee for the denomination, so I'm a part of this, and I also chair what was mandated to us by Synod 2025, which is a study of our relationship with the RCA.
Okay.
So that's a 5-year study. We're a year into that study, and we were just asked to study that relationship. What are the ins and outs of it? Our denominations have shifted in different directions a bit. We still have a lot of commonality. We have a lot of shared history. We have a lot of shared ministry together. And so this past year in that study, we put this in our report too. There's just a multiplicity of ways we have to understand our relationship with the RCA, but that's going to be ongoing in the future. We've talked to a lot of people this past year, just people that are in union congregations or those who are RCA pastors serving CRCs and CRC pastors serving in RCAs and all of these things that are mixed up. But we'll have some recommendations from the EIRC going forward. Now, also, when we talked about the WCRC, the World Communion of Reformed Churches, Synod turned down the EIRC's recommendation to stay in that multilateral organization. And so that's also, okay, as a committee, are we hearing what Synod is saying? So I think that's going to be part of our discussions going forward, is trying to decipher what is Synod saying about our relationships.
That's a really good point, right? Like maybe they're saying we want them to be a little more well-defined or a little more careful or a little bit smaller number.
Right.
Or defined by theological agreement.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's one thing that the EIRC is going to have to keep in mind. The hottest deliberations were around EIRC stuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember any kind of deliberation about EIRC stuff at Synod before at all. And so in a lot of ways, there's probably a light that's shining on that group, almost like a spotlight in terms of what's going on within that group, that Synod is just pointed in your direction. And so you'll have to steward that well, all that attention, because I think that you're right. If there are, I would guess there probably will be overtures sent about
Any
who
number
are
of,
our churches in cooperation, who are our churches in communion, and
The chair of our committee, Shirley Rules, I think she mentioned the number of relationships that we have. And it is hard to manage. We have so many churches. And what does that mean to be in relationship? I mean, we can bring churches into a relationship with a CRC, but if you never communicate, is that a relationship? And one thing I know about Shirley, having worked with her this past year, who also happens to be my old human resources prof from my Calvin College days. So it's been kind of fun to come back together with her. But she is a good listener, and she wants to serve the church well. And so she's the chair. She stewards our committee. And so we'll have some good discussions coming up, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Especially some of these places, I guess I'm just thinking about the RCA, I could see moving in the next couple of years a direction. And then you could think, well, every time somebody moves, you probably have to reevaluate yourself again.
Yep.
I got a couple more questions for you guys. The first one is, first of my last two questions is, why do you agree to let your names stand in leadership here? What is it that is, it's a lot of work. Yeah. People don't always like you. Sometimes they overrule you, or sometimes they're like, why are you doing this? So what is rewarding enough about this, or feeds your soul enough? Like, why would you do this?
Oh boy, that's a good question. It's really just a love for the church, knowing we need to have people do these jobs. And there were others that put their name up, and we both knew that there were others that were put their name up and would be capable to do this. But I think having some experience in the past it makes me more apt to do it in the future, which I think is a good sign, even though it is a lot of work. I mean, we are doing meetings at 7:30 in the morning, and we're getting done about 10 o'clock at night. And, you don't get to hang out with your friends like the other delegates do in the same way. Although I got to hang out with Derek, which is wonderful, and Jose and Dave, and that was wonderful. But there is, what's rewarding is just kind of being able to sort of watch the whole process. When you're the chair, when you're an officer, you have to pay attention to every conversation. And so you're in every conversation. And I think as you're going along, you're like, I just want to help the church make it its best decision it possibly can do. And so a love for the church, a love for the word, and a love for seeing the gospel go forth. And I mentioned that in my closing message about the gospel. And I thought that was just beautiful to see that again and again coming up in the church planting report and the church renewal report, and just making sure that's what our church is focused on and aiming toward.
I love that.
What you said, Derek.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's weird because you have to approach Synod in a very different way. Rather than speaking to any individual motion, you want to make sure that all of Synod plays by the rules together. And also, like, Synod is this body, so it operates as a whole, and you want to make sure that you keep it from harm. And there are a bunch of ways that the body can be harmed, and that a myriad of ways that you might not think about, maybe unless you're in that seat.
Right.
And the threats are from all over the place, and too long deliberations, too short deliberations, like if all of those sorts of things. Attacking from some folks, calling out individuals, the conversation devolving, all of that sort of stuff is something that you just keep in mind because you're like, man, the body is feeling this. And so it's approaching it, so the reason that I say yes is I'm like, I want to try as much as possible, as much as it falls to me, to be like, I want this body to be healthy, and I want our decisions to be as healthy as possible so that as we leave, we can leave together, even if some people are leaving pretty disappointed because they were on the losing side of a lot of those votes. I want for us to be like, all right, well, actually, we all deliberated together in accordance with the rules. We all tried to respect each other as much as possible, so we can all walk out together in a spirit of camaraderie as much as possible. That's the thing that I really care about in relation to all this. That's why I'm like, yeah, I'm willing to do it.
Is it kind of frustrating, though, because you don't get to ever say what you think? Like, you don't get to go up to the microphone and be like, listen, here's my take on this.
Well, we do have the opportunity to do that. I mean, we could relinquish the chair and go and speak, and I know you could do the same thing. Historically, that's not always the best thing to do. You do hold a position sort of influence as the president and the vice president, even the clerks as well, too, that when you say something, people listen to you a little differently. So you got to steward that really well. So I've kind of made it my practice when I've served as an officer, and only 2 times, but that I don't speak. We get enough opportunity to be a part of the conversations behind as we're setting things up for this, that we're there to let the delegates speak. I mean, we're there to serve them, right? Really. So that they have a clear way to say what they need to say and what they want to say. So it is a little frustrating because you're as the chair, you're the one that has the people directing their conversation to you, or they're supposed to, right? But so you're hearing people say things, and I'm like, I don't agree with you at all. But I'm going to smile at you because I want you to know that you need to be able to say what you need to say, and then thank them and move on to the next person without trying to kind of tip my hand like, yeah, I'm agreeing with this person, I'm disagreeing with that person, and people can do all the guessing they want. But, we're there for the delegates. We're there to serve them.
Yeah, that's really good. So my last question is, what advice do you have? Can you be the president of Synod over and over again? I mean, so we heard like the SBC, you can do it twice. PCA, you could do it more than once, but they don't. So what's the CRC rule? Could you just forever, like for decades, put your name in and be the president if people elected you?
I would imagine you could. I don't think there's any rule against it.
Yeah.
Now, you have to be a delegate to be on.
Okay.
And oftentimes they don't send the same delegates years in a row.
Right.
Like I'm in a class, which we have 26, 27 churches. And so even our opportunity to go doesn't come around very often. I was there in 23, and I was a little surprised to be delegated this year in 2026 already. Because as you see, those 10 years before that, right? Now, I know your classes has gotten a little smaller.
Yep, a lot smaller. So I don't want to go again for a while. I want to hang back from Synod for a while till my kids are a little older. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
There is a time and a season for it in your life too.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So my question for you guys then is, what advice would you have for next year's Synod president and vice president?
And this is the advice I got from Derek, and also I got this advice from Stephen Terpstra, who was the president last year, who was also a good friend. And he just said, just make sure you are making it possible for the delegates to do what they need to do. You know, they have been called by Christ Church to serve in this way. They're the voice that is ordained for this purpose. And so serve them well. And I think that would be the advice I would give to is like, yeah, you're here. We have an organization, you know, that we call the Christian Reformed Church in North America, with its agencies and institutions and boards and committees and all those sorts of things. But those are all in service of the church as well. And so we need to let the church speak. You know, we do believe in the authority of the church and the local church. And this is the way we delegate our authority all the way up to synod. And so serve those delegates well and do what you can.
Yeah, it's really good. Do you have any other thoughts?
I co-sign that.
There we go.
Thank you guys both so much for talking about this. This is so interesting. Sometimes you watch this, but you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for watching this episode of the Banner Podcast. We are so glad you spent a little bit of time with us. As the Lord brings it to mind, if you would say a prayer for our church, our denomination, and our synod as they do this good, hard work and have to keep doing it. These are just people who have regular day jobs and have to take a week of vacation to come and do this work for the church. So we're grateful for them. May the Lord bless you and keep you.